it was all said and done.
We have seen a brand new way of looking at and thinking about this electoral map.
What was solid blue for a generation.
This is a white working class path to the presidency.
Turned red overnight.
We won Michigan, Pennsylvania, and we won Wisconsin.
And though Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote by more than 2.5 million people, in the end, just 80,000 votes across 3 states was enough for Trump. Tonight, we return to the state that put the Republican over the top with the senator who won Wisconsin in the primary looking for answers.
There are a lot of people out of desperation saying, I'm hurting, I'm in pain, I am worried about my kids. This guy says he's going to do something for me. I'm going to give him a shot.
This is All in America. Bernie Sanders in Trump country.
Good evening from the UAW Local 72 in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm Chris Hayes. We're calling it Trump country. Do you folks think this is Trump country? No. That may be true in this crowd, but for the first time since 1984, Wisconsin voted for a Republican for president. And in many ways, the story of Wisconsin is the story of 2016, the state flipping to Trump after voting for President Obama twice. After Election Day, Trump's Wisconsin margin stood at just 22,617 votes, about a quarter of the capacity of Lambeau Field, where the Packers play. We're here in Kenosha County, which in many ways is the story of Wisconsin. This county hasn't voted for a Republican for president since 1972. But according to the statewide recount initiated by Green Party candidate Jill Stein, now complete in Kenosha, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton here by just 237 votes. There are more people than that right here in this room. We've got Trump voters in the audience tonight. We've got Clinton voters. We've got people who didn't even vote. We're here to have a frank and open conversation about what happened in this election, where we are as a country, and where we go from here. Now, Donald Trump is not the only candidate who beat Hillary Clinton in Wisconsin. We also have with us Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who says we could all stand to do more listening in communities like this. Please join me in welcoming Senator Sanders. Have a seat.
Thank you. This is awful intimate here.
Yes, it's very close, very close. So, look, one of the things I think has been interesting after the election, right? This thing was so close. We're talking 80,000 votes across 3 states. That everybody plausibly has an argument for what's definitive, right? Because it was so close. I want to hear your theory of the case when you say, if you have to give someone the Bernie Sanders theory of the case of why this election turned out the way that it did, what's your theory of the case?
Well, my theory of the case is there's a lot of pain in this country, a lot of pain in Wisconsin. For the last 40 years, the middle class of this country has been disappearing. We have massive levels of income and wealth inequality here in Kenosha, in Wisconsin and Vermont. Companies shut down, moved to China, moved to Mexico, paying people a fraction of the wages they pay in this country. There are enormous economic problems facing the middle class in this country. And the media doesn't talk about them. Most politicians don't talk about them. And that's why we're here today, to have a frank discussion, A, of where we are, how we got here, and where we're going to go in the future.
So here's my question. When you talk about this, 40 years of this, which is, I think, is a good time frame, right? You start to look at what happens right around the 1970s, a real shift in the economy, away from the middle class towards the 1%. If that's the case, why was it this year, right? When people talk about factories moving overseas, that's been going on for years. Barack Obama won a state like this. He won Kenosha twice. You had Bill Clinton, who was you know, a real proponent of free trade, winning 2 elections in a row. If those are the trends that drove this outcome, why did it all erupt this year?
Well, I think we're going to hear from people who know the answer better than I do, the people of Kenosha. They will give us their answer. But I think ultimately, many people are saying enough is enough. They are wondering why in the richest country in the history of the world, so many people are struggling economically, why people can't afford health care or child care. And by the way, why we have so much income and wealth inequality. Nobody here, I suspect, thinks it is appropriate that the top 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Anybody think that makes sense? No. Anybody think it makes sense that 52% of all new income is going to the top 1%? No. I don't think people do. And they're sitting there and they're saying, we don't want more of the same old, same old. Trump comes along and he says, a multi-billionaire, I don't pay any taxes. Yeah, I got companies in Turkey and Mexico and China, but I am going to stand up to the economic establishment. I'm going to stand up to the political establishment. I'm going to take them all on. And I think a lot of people responded, okay, we'll give this guy a shot.
You know, I was talking to some folks who we're going to bring out in a little bit, folks who live here who voted for Trump, and one of the things they talked about was just how much they liked his the way that he communicated. Yeah. You know, obviously he said things that created tremendous controversy, offense, real, I think in some cases, real genuine pain for some folks, Muslim Americans in this country particularly. But there's a sense that he was violating some set of manners that shouldn't exist. What do you make of that?
No, I think that's true. I think he said he will not be politically correct. I think he said some outrageous and painful things, but I think people are tired of the same old political rhetoric, and they believe that he was speaking from his heart and willing to take on everybody.
What do you think about political correctness? What does that mean to you?
What it means is you have a set of talking points which have been poll tested and focus group tested, and that's what you say rather than what's really going on. And often what you are not allowed to say are things which offend very, very powerful people. For years and years, we have been told by Republicans and many Democrats that our trade policy was a great idea, that it was working for America. Well, you know what? The American people don't believe it. They think there's something wrong when just with permanent normal trade relations with China and the Mexican free trade agreement, we have lost some 4 million decent paying jobs. The American people, I think, want candidates and politicians to have the guts to stand up to the billionaire class and start representing the middle class and working families of this country. I don't think it's more complicated than that.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask the audience for a second. When you hear political correctness, okay, do you think about trade policies? Raise your hand if that's what you're thinking about when you hear political correctness. When you hear political correctness, do you think about the way that you are or are not allowed to talk about certain groups of Americans? Right. So it seems to me that that was part of it too, right? I mean, he was going after these shibboleths, like you said, right? These consensus things, but he was also saying things, frankly, when we talk about political correctness, are basically just rules about being not being a jerk.
And I'll tell you what else he was doing. I'd like some comments on this. He was talking about the media. Do people here think that the media reflects the reality of American society?
No. Right.
All right, so that's one on you, Chris.
Right. Well, I'm not trying to score points. My point here, though, is
I understand that.
My point, though, is that these things are intertwined, right? It's
yes.
that if he's violating taboos that we think are taboos that should be violated, he was violating taboos that a lot of folks, I'll put myself in them, think we should keep, like the taboos about how you talk about women or people of color or people of other religions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, and I think some of that is unfortunate, because I happen to believe one of the arguments as to why Trump won is the belief that most of, or many of his supporters are sexist or are racist or are homophobes. I happen not to believe that's the case. I think what he did do is he said, you know what? There is a lot of pain in this country. People are scared and people are worried. One example, right now, 50% of older workers, 55 to 64, do you know how much money they have in the bank as they enter retirement? Who wants to guess? Zero. What do you think? People are scared to death of retirement. So I think the answer is, he said, right. And I think his main success story is all across the board, I will stand up to the establishment, whether it's the political establishment, the media establishment, the economic establishment. Now, I happen to think he won't do that, but be that as it may, we'll discuss that tonight. I think that was his major argument. People are tired of status quo politics. He broke through that.
How do you square that with the way that you think about, and the way the voters think about Barack Obama's presidency, which he's got a 59% approval rating right now. You've said, look, there are a lot of things he didn't do sufficiently, but generally you think he's a good president. One of the great paradoxes, I mean, I even think, how many people in this room feel good about Barack Obama? I think he's a good president. All right. Again, I will note this is not a scientific cross sample of the voters of Kenosha, as much as I love all the people in this room, and thank you for coming. But there's a real distance between that 59% approval rating and what happened in this election?
Well, I think you got two things. All right, question again, unscientifically. Are we better off economically today than we were when Obama first came in and Bush left office? Okay. That is, okay, most people think yes, and I think the overwhelming evidence is that we are. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month when Obama first came in. We're better off, I think. Most people would agree. But on the other hand, despite that, the middle class continues to decline. So you got, yeah, we're better off than we were 8 years ago, but millions of people are hurting, and they are scared to death that their kids will have a lower standard of living than they do. And that brings off a whole lot of anxiety.
And we should know we are here at Local 72, the UAW. It's an amazing facility. It was built in the 1960s. In some ways a testament to what Kenosha was in the sort of heyday of auto manufacturing that happened here. Up next, we're going to bring in a panel of Trump supporters to talk with the senator. Don't go anywhere. The senator said he wanted an argument. What do you think of the idea of free college tuition?
That's the moment I stopped listening to anything coming out of your mouth when you said that, because it is so absurd.
Kenosha made things. That is the legacy of my generation and the generations prior to mine. We made things. We made cars. We made mattresses here. We made men's clothing here. We made fire engines here. It was the identity of our community. We made stuff, and we were darn proud of it.
On the shores of Lake Michigan, between Chicago and Milwaukee, Kenosha, Wisconsin, a city and a region that flourished in the heyday of American industry.
This was a manufacturing community. We made things. This community was built on the hands and backs of working people who came to work in those factories.
Back in 1902, Kenosha started making cars, beginning with the Jeffrey Rambler. Nash Motors bought the plant 14 years later, and by the 1920s, it was the biggest employer in Kenosha, and the jobs just kept getting better.
Largely due to the efforts of organized labor in the community, jobs that were low-paying factory jobs became good-paying factory jobs. Factory workers suddenly in the 1950s got to a position where they could make a good living. They could enter the middle class.
In the 1950s, the company was called American Motors. Workers were making good money and iconic American cars.
Rambler American is your kind of car.
By 1960, American Motors employed 14,000 workers in Kenosha and accounted for over 43% of the city's total employment. But in the 1970s, the company started to have problems.
The company plans to lay off 1,000 employees for 1 week and will shut down all operations for 3 more weeks.
In 1987, Chrysler bought American Motors, and the very next year, they stopped making cars in Kenosha.
Chrysler is leaving town. So are 5,500 jobs.
It's going to hurt everybody. Drive a lot of people out of business. A lot of people just bought new Chrysler cars and they bought new houses thinking they had jobs for 3 to 5 years.
The loss of 5,500 jobs to a city the size of Kenosha is equivalent to losing 500,000 jobs in New York City.
Chrysler did keep making car engines in Kenosha, but closed that plant in 2010. It was torn down in 2013.
The plant's all gone. There's a big empty lot. And I guess you look at that big empty lot and say, there's a challenge there.
There are still jobs in Kenosha. In fact, the unemployment rate is below the national average. But the jobs today are very different.
Most of the employees in the manufacturing sector were unionized. They had good benefits. They had good, solid salaries. And what's happened after this transition is the newer jobs, which we're very grateful for, aren't paying as well as the manufacturing jobs were. And I think there's a real political consequence. If somebody wants to know what happened in the election from a month ago, they need only drive down 52nd Street in Kenosha and look at those 100+ acres of empty space that represent both what was in Kenosha and the hopes and dreams of the future of Kenosha as it rebuilds.
All right, right, we are back here in Kenosha, and as I said before, you know, Kenosha County went for Donald Trump in the presidential election by 237 votes, less than the amount of people in this room. We're going to introduce you now to some folks who voted for Donald Trump. I want to introduce you to Richard Beiser, who backed Barack Obama in 2008, voted for Democrats' down ticket. Jamie Sabena, she's a divorced mom of two. She's holding down multiple jobs. She believes that Trump will bring back jobs. Her son backed Bernie Sanders. We have with us Gail Sparks, who is an electronic technician. Her husband is unemployed due to disability. Didn't vote in 2012. Felt it was important to come out and vote in this election for Donald Trump. Matt Augustine, who's a longtime union man and longtime Republican who voted for Donald Trump. And Matt, let me start with you a little bit. You were nodding your head, and the Senator was too. How... You know, you're a longtime union guy and a longtime Republican, which is not always something that goes together. How important do you think organized labor is to a strong middle class?
The grassroots is important. The leadership in the unions has been lacking, and the grassroots unions are important up to a point. And I think the unions have lost their way over the last 20 years. They don't represent the people like they used to. That's what's changed, but the people are still important.
What does it mean to you when you think about the decline? I mean, I look at this place and I think between the outsourcing that's happened, the jobs that have left, the decline of unions, it's hard to imagine being able to build a place like this today.
It was sad to see the union. I worked at Snap-on for 30 years. They closed the plant here and they moved to Milwaukee, and I didn't go. 30 years is enough. And it was sad to see the jobs go. I lived in Kenosha my whole life.
Richard, you voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary here in Wisconsin. You voted for Donald Trump in the primary, but you said you voted down ticket for Democrats on Election Day.
Yes, I did.
And you're generally a Democratic voter.
Yes, I am.
But this time you voted for Trump. Why'd you vote for Donald Trump?
Basically because he wasn't Hillary.
Have people heard that a lot among people they've talked to?
Yes. Yep.
Would you have supported Senator Sanders if he was the nominee?
Yes, I would have.
What do you think of that, Senator Sanders?
Well, I appreciate it.
That's not...
But, Chris, as you know, we won Kenosha pretty handily, and we won the state of Wisconsin in the primary. And I think the message that we brought forth is that it is time to create an economy that works for all of us and not just the 1%. It's time to support organized labor and make it easier for workers to get into unions. It is time, and I'd like to raise this issue, maybe we can get into it in a moment. We are the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people as a right. How many people think we should move in that direction?
Let me ask you folks up there, Jamie, is that when you think about your voting, Senator Sanders talking about guaranteeing health care, is that something as a right, is that the sort of thing that you're interested in?
Okay, that's great, but how are we going to pay for that? And how is it? Right now, if you try to go online and look for insurance, it is a massive disaster. You could spend 2 hours on there and you have no idea what to look for.
Right.
Also, for me, being as what I do for a living, I'm lucky, I'm quite healthy. I'm looking at insurance premiums that were $300, $400 a month and a $10,000 deductible. That's ridiculous. How can someone afford that?
That's right.
Gail, you expressed frustration with the way things are going, and you're someone who wasn't psyched about either candidate in 2012, but felt strongly about coming out this time around. What changed?
It was the fact that it seemed as though, number one, I think the country needs a bit of a change. They have put a lot of Republicans, Democrats, professional politicians in that office. Trump seemed more of him being the businessman. What's this country full of? Business or talk?
What do you think about that, Senator? You're someone who's devoted his life to public service.
Well, I think you make a good point. I think what you're really saying is people are sick and tired of establishment politics, right? And they want somebody who says he's going to do something and cut through a lot of the crap.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I understand that. All right. Matt, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I agree. You know, I liked Trump from the beginning because he was open and upfront with everybody, and he talked to the people, pretty much like you did too. And the people that I know, it was either Donald Trump or you on the other end. Nothing in between. They didn't like any of the other candidates, and that's from a grassroots point of view.
You're talking about your union?
Well, just everybody.
Yeah.
No matter who you talk to, they like Donald Trump and they like Bernie because they talk to the people. And we thought everybody else was just giving us a bunch of hogwash. They were just talking over us.
Mm-hmm. Richard, do you think that when we talk about the kinds of jobs that were in Kenosha, do you see a future in which those come back?
No. No. That day is come and gone. It's the industry in Kenosha is so diversified now, whereas before, when it was just Chrysler, it was just a one-track pony, you know.
Do people feel like things are going to get better in Kenosha?
I'm optimistic enough to think that they are. I hope that they are. I'm pretty sure that they are.
Let me jump in if I could.
Please,
Chris.
go ahead.
Let me ask you guys a question, and all of you voted for Trump. Question, why has the middle class been in decline for the last 40 years? What do you think? Does that have something to do with corporate greed?
I think it has to somehow I think it has to do with what kind of CEOs are graduating from college and how they care. We had plant managers at Snap-on Tools who are the CEOs that actually cared about people. Right. Howard Brown from the Kenosha News cared about the people. The new ones don't. That's a big change that I've seen.
That's a very important.
And it has nothing to do with corporate greed. It's just greedy individuals that are in the wrong position.
Do you think the culture's changed?
The culture's changed a lot.
That's a good point. Other reasons. Why has the middle class been declining, and why do we have so much income and wealth inequality?
Because so many of our jobs are going overseas.
Okay. Do all of you believe that our current trade policies, NAFTA, PNTR with China, have been a disaster for workers?
They're terrible.
Okay.
Exactly.
I thought from the beginning. It all started with GATT. You know that, too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
GATT should have never been negotiated. They took 30 years to negotiate that behind closed doors. Nobody had a voice in it.
Is there a general consensus here that our trade policies have failed the American worker? No. Yeah. Well, I just want everybody to know, you're looking at a guy who voted against every one of these trade agreements. And what was also clear to me is that the guys who wrote these trade agreements wanted very much to have the opportunity to shut down in Kenosha or in Vermont and move to Mexico and move to China where they could pay people very low wages. You didn't need a PhD in economics to figure that one out.
Yeah.
All right. So I gather that all of you would be sympathetic to a major rewrite of our current trade policies, demanding that corporate America start investing in this country and not just in low-wage countries around the world.
Right.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Good. Good. Second question. You got a lot of people, I'm sure in Kenosha, I know in my state of Vermont, who cannot get by on the 10, 11 bucks an hour they're making. Should we raise the minimum wage to a living wage?
No.
All right.
Wait, there's some.
Okay. Let's hear it. Why don't we go just...
Yeah, I want to hear. If there's dissent, I want to hear it.
Yeah, there
were some no's. What do you think?
Okay. I don't know how you can take someone working at McDonald's and pay them $15 an hour and not expect everything to go up around. Obviously, food's going to have to go up. If you want to pay workers for bagging groceries up to $12, okay, your groceries are going to have to go up. Everything is going to have to go up.
I want you to hold that thought because there is dissent on this, although it's a very popular position. I want to bring in some more voters right after this break. Stick around. We'll bring in another panel to respond to what you just heard. Don't go anywhere.
Trump posed a real threat to our existence in this country. And I say this as someone who's born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
I would never want to see anybody thrown out just because of their beliefs or their, I mean, that's awful. No.
All right, we're here back in Kenosha, and you know, Jamie just made a point about the minimum wage, which you hear a lot. You hear it from voters, you hear it from folks at think tanks about if you raise the minimum wage to, say, $15 an hour, you're just going to increase costs, right? And someone's going to be paying for that. I'm curious if any of you folks here, you guys are all Democrats, and John, you're a former union president. What does that argument stand to you?
Well, first of all, one of the things I think people miss about raising the minimum wage, if the minimum wage goes up, everybody's wage goes up, okay, because the floor is raised. And I think people miss that. They say, well, why should people at McDonald's? And I hear that all the time at McDonald's. It's not just about people that work at McDonald's. And people making the minimum wage, by and large, those are not just young people. Those are people who are raising a family, people that need a higher wage.
But if everyone's wages go up, doesn't that even make her argument more salient, which is that if everyone's wages are going up, won't costs explode?
No, I think it goes back to Senator Sanders' argument that income has shifted in this country to the top 1%, away from the rest of the people in this country. If you raise the minimum wage, that brings the income back to the people, takes it away from the 1%, and it gives people purchasing power now that they don't have. And it will help the economy.
Okay. You're shaking your head. You don't like this minimum wage argument.
No.
Stand up. What's your name, sir?
Gabe Noodle. Well, the minimum wage, yes, it is good, but the minimum wage, I believe, was meant to be for people with part-time jobs or going to school, trying to help out. Now, when you increase everything, just like now, with insurance, for instance, in the last couple of years with the Obamacare, well, I pay right now, me and my wife pay 40% of our income goes to insurance. That's what's bad. You increase the minimum wage, everybody else is going to have to make more money. I'm retired. My wife is what I call semi-retired. She gets Social Security, but she has to work just to pay for the insurance. Increasing the minimum wage, what's going to do to me?
Yeah. Well,
another thing, maybe that's going back on something else now about immigration.
Okay.
They were talking about immigration, illegal immigration. I'm an immigrant myself, but I came in legally. I had to wait 10 years in line for me to come in.
So let me get back to this minimum wage, Senator, because actually we're running an experiment right now, right? We actually have states that have done this. We're going to kind of see how important do you think is the results in a state like California that has actually raised the minimum wage considerably?
And Vermont has also raised the minimum wage, and a number of states have. I'm picking up on John's point. There has been, over the last number of decades, a massive shift of income and wealth to the top 1%. And if this country is going to survive economically, we've got to shift some of that money back to the middle class and working families. Number two, if you make $7.25 or $8 an hour, you ain't going to go out and buy anything. You're not going to buy furniture. You're not going to buy. You're not going to take your family out to eat. And when you don't have that disposable income, you're not helping to create other people's jobs. And the third point that I make, I very often hear that argument about the possibility of prices going up, but I don't hear that when you have CEOs making 300 times salary of what their workers are making.
We're going to take a quick break and be back with much more from Kenosha right after this.
I find it interesting that what 3 out of 4 of you are saying is, yeah, he talked about that stuff, but it'll never happen. We don't believe that it will ever happen. Why do you vote for somebody who, in a sense, then is lying?
Kenosha, Senator Sanders is talking about free college education. Here, stand up for a second. Tell me your name.
Mary Magdalene Moser.
Mary Magdalene, I saw you nodding, shaking your head vigorously in disagreement to both arguments about the minimum wage and free college tuition. So maybe let's start on the latter, because the senator said he wanted an argument. What do you think of the idea of free college tuition?
That's the moment I stopped listening to anything coming out of your mouth when you said that, because it is so absurd. Who is going to pay for it? Why don't you address how college tuition has skyrocketed 6,000% since the 1980s. You can't have an industry where once you pass a seniority level, it is impossible to fire you. That's ridiculous. No other industry has that type of protection. That needs to go. Tenure needs to go.
Well, no, I don't think tenure needs to go, and I don't think, But here is the point, and it hasn't gone up 6,000%. It has gone up a lot, not 6,000%. So let's stick to the facts. But here is the issue. Very simple issue. In the United States of America, Mary, do you think all people, regardless of their income, all young people, should have an equal right to get a college education, or should that only benefit the wealthy or upper middle class?
I believe the way the United States works as it is today, where every single human being in the United States has the opportunity to go to college. I do not believe it is a right, and I do not believe that I should be expected to pay for not only my education and my children's, but somebody else's as well.
But Mary, when we are losing at least $100 billion every single year because large multinational corporations stash their money in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens, that's not you who's going to be asked to pay more in taxes. We have massive levels of income and wealth inequality. Corporation after corporation doesn't pay a nickel in taxes. Donald Trump, a multi-billionaire, proudly told us he doesn't pay a nickel in federal taxes.
Why was Jeffrey Immelt, Barack Obama's advisor?
That's an interesting response. Say that again.
Then why was Jeffrey Immelt, CEO of GE, who proudly declared he paid 0% in corporate taxes, why did Barack Obama name him his chief economic advisor?
You are damn right. That was a stupid thing to do. All right, so I'm not here. You were right.
Thank you.
And by the way, Jeffrey Immelt, many, many years ago, got up before a group of people. You know what he said? He said, and I quote you, "When I look at the future of General Electric, one of the largest corporations in America, I see China, 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 and China." All right? That was Jeffrey Immelt. And you are quite right. GE in a given year paid 0 in federal income taxes. But my point is, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, it is wrong to say that we are the wealthiest. In terms of total wealth, we are. But the point is, in this country, with our wealth, I think it is grossly unfair that working class kids simply do not have the necessary income to get a college education. And I think we should do what Germany does and many other countries and say that when we talk about public education, we're not just talking about first grade through 12th grade, we're talking about college as well.
Here, I want to talk to you for a second. Your producer, my producer, spoke to you. Stand up for a second. Your name is Rima, right?
Yes.
Tell me your full name.
Rima Ahmed.
You know, Rima, I'm curious. There are a whole bunch of prisms to understand this election, right? We talk about manufacturing. We talk about the middle class. There are people who feel that really the driving force of Donald Trump was bigotry or was all kinds of sort of ways that he was able to scapegoat folks. And I'm curious what you think the sort of analysis is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Trump's campaign was a campaign of hate. I'm a community organizer in the primary. I was running a campaign actually down in Illinois. I was a Bernie supporter, did switch over to Hillary in the general election, and it's because for me, for the communities that I'm a part of, for the community that I want to be a part of, Trump posed a real threat to our existence in this country. And I say this as someone who's born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm a Wisconsinite, I'm a Midwesterner, I'm an American. So, yeah.
When you say posed a real threat to the existence of the communities you're part of, what do you mean by that?
I mean folks of color. I mean communities of immigrants. I mean Trump has talked about putting folks that look like me on a national registry. I mean we're thinking about Japanese internment. And I'm also talking about other immigrant communities that have benefited from DAPA and DACA. What are those communities going to do? Are my friends, are my family members going to be deported now? People who call this country home, people who identify as Americans, is this what's going to happen? This is terrifying. And I say this also as somebody who has family members who voted for Trump. I come from a multi-ethnic, multi-religious family, and this is something we tried not to talk about on Thanksgiving. But it's scary to see, to know that neighbors, family members, may look past the threat that Trump poses to our very livelihood just because they wanted something different.
I want you to respond to that. You're shaking your head, Matt. What do you make of that?
Well, let's ask everybody up here. I mean, what Rima is saying, let me just throw it out. She is saying that Trump won a whole lot of votes based on bigotry, trying to turn one group of people against the other. What do you guys think?
No.
Okay, well, just tell us.
He stirred a dialogue There's not one person in this room, Democrat or Republican or Independent, that would allow anything to happen like that, and even our Congress. That would not be acceptable to anybody. And he just started the dialogue, and the dialogue has changed, and it's gotten better. None of that's ever going to happen. I was not even...
He's proposing legislation, though. He's proposing bringing back a national registry. He's proposing removing DAPA and DACA. These are
in the first place, you can't promote that. That's anti-religion. It's against our Constitution.
I agree.
That's never going to pass. And even if it went to the Supreme Court, I don't care, it would be thrown out. He can propose all he wants. It's got to go through our Congress first. That's another buffer zone we have.
Do other people? This was something that I encountered a lot when I talked to Trump voters, who would say very similar things. They would basically say the things that he says that are the worst things, like the Muslim ban, for instance, that that's just him talking smack, basically, and it's not going to happen. Does that? I'm curious what you three think of that. Like, is that how you thought of it, or do you think, like, I hope he does that, or?
No, I hope he does not do that. No, I mean, I would never want to see anybody thrown out just because of their beliefs or their. I mean, that's awful. No.
Gail?
You know, to some extent, I'm hoping it is. Being one that works in a factory, and I have tried to finish my college degree to be in this factory to do the job I'm doing. But because there's so many illegals in there, I can't get the pay I should get.
So you think illegal, undocumented immigrants are threatening your pay, and you hope he does deport a lot of them?
Well, not including the fact it's even been said on radio that a lot of them that get stopped don't pay their tickets. They go to Mexico and hide. They get away with it. They don't pay their taxes. They go to Mexico and hide, and then come back. I've seen this. It's upsetting.
Senator, you want to respond to that?
Well, did you want to, Richard, did you want
to? I think that a lot of what he says is just unimplementable rhetoric, just to gain attention, and it would never be congressionally approved.
Well, as somebody who was in the Congress, let me not, I'm not quite so sure that you're right. But I think that there's no question to my mind, and I find it interesting that what 3 out of 4 of you are saying is, yeah, he talked about that stuff, but it'll never happen. We don't believe that it will ever happen. Why do you vote for somebody who, in a sense, then is lying?
He started a dialogue with the American people, and he used the media to get his point across, and he's changed his view. He wasn't lying. He started the dialogue. He voiced his opinion, and he got feedback, and he addressed it as he went along. He knows as well as anybody in this room, you can't go after a group of people because of religious beliefs. It's never, and I knew that right off the bat. Well, but he was still up front, and he talked to the public.
Well, it's an interesting point. I mean, what you're saying is that you think, and I think, that what he was talking about was unconstitutional. Yet you got a candidate for president of the United States talking about grossly unconstitutional things, and wins an election.
Well, look what our Congress does. They pass unconstitutional laws every day.
Can I ask one thing?
Yeah, please.
You know, I'm sitting
ask 2
here.
things.
Oh, thank you. I might make it 3. I'm sitting here and I'm listening to all this, and you know, as she says, who's paying for this? Right? Who's paying for the Medicaid? Who's paying for the Social Security? Who's paying for the Medicare? Who? Thank you. We are. Now, have any of you seen down on streets that it seems as though we have become the silent minority and not the majority?
What do you mean by that?
How much have we been listened to, really?
But who's the we when you say this? You mean
us people.
Who people?
The people who need the Medicare, the people who need the Social Security, who needs the help with the education.
Okay, but now here's good point. Let's see if we can go forward on this. I am assuming that you believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that we should not cut Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. Is that correct or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe it shouldn't be cut.
Okay. Do you know who is now working very hard to try to do that? Republicans in Congress have a plan under the guise of saving Medicare and saving Social Security, making devastating cuts. That's what the Republicans are now trying to do. The other point that you made, which is a very, I think you made it, or you, both of you have made it actually, is who's going to pay for this stuff? And that is a very fair point. What all of us should know is that over the last 25 years, there has been a massive transfer of wealth in this country from you to the top 1/10 of 1%. In other words, the middle class has shrunk, and trillions of dollars have gone to the top 1/10 of 1%. Do you think it's inappropriate to ask those people to start paying their fair share of taxes so we can adequately fund Medicaid and making public colleges and universities tuition free? Is that an unfair thing to ask?
I don't think it's an unfair thing to ask. The 1%ers, they got rich off us.
That's right.
So it's time they put back.
Okay, that's all I'm saying.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back with much more from the crowd. Don't go anywhere.
There is some rhetoric coming from Mr. Trump, which, needless to say, disturbs me very, very much. His campaign, which was based on bigotry, bothers me. This cabinet that he's appointing, it seems the major qualification is to have to be a billionaire.
Bringing some voters. Obviously, we said this was a very closely contested election in this county. Bringing some voters who voted for the Democrat, Hillary Clinton. Anthony Davis, who's a UAW retiree, active in his church, backed Hillary Clinton. Ann Wilson, who's also a UAW retiree, a poll worker on the recount, who backed Hillary. Todd Junker, who's a student, president of the UW Parkside Democrats, who backed Bernie Sanders in the primary and switched to Hillary. And John Drew, who's the former president of this local, UAW Local 72, and a UW state rep who fought for the Chrysler Engine Kenosha plant to stay open. Anthony, let me maybe start with you about how you understand. I want to get back to this question of the minimum wage in a second, so I put a pin in that. But how you understand this election?
From what I understand this election, it got really angry to me, and I don't think it was more about personalities. That's the thing that got to me, and like I said, they never really got into the policies, what they were going to do for the people. They couldn't, I guess, articulate it in a way where a lot of folks understood. What, like I said, they talk about each other. Right. And I wanted some meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
Good. That's what I missed.
Did people feel like, how many people felt like it was too personality driven, the election? You don't think so?
And like I said, I talked to a lot of people and friends, and some folks, they just didn't care anymore. They didn't care.
Is that because both candidates were beating each other up so badly?
Yeah. And it just got sickening to my stomach every time I turned the TV on. This is what I'm seeing. These are the people that's going to represent me, the average guy.
Did you feel they were symmetrical, though? And did you feel that both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were equally to blame for the tenor of the campaign?
In ways, yes.
Really?
In ways, because like I said, the way Donald talked all the time, it was just like, you more or less talk down to people.
Yeah.
That's why I felt. And sometimes, it felt like Hillary didn't connect.
We keep hearing this theme a lot. And were you surprised by the way that Kenosha went, or did you feel like you saw that coming?
In a way, I was surprised because we've always been a pretty Democratic area. But at the same time, we've had a lot of people that have been moving up from Illinois that has changed the whole demographics.
The Illinois carpetbaggers. Is that it? You've been infiltrated by...
No, they're legitimate. It was legitimate for them to vote here. But I guess that's why I wasn't surprised. When I saw the totals, because of being on the Board of Canvass for the county, we really actually see those totals probably more so than the average person. And I was a little surprised at some of the wards in the community that went with Trump. Normally that does not happen. Normally the Democrat still pulls it out, even if they're squeaking it out. So I guess it was a little of both.
Todd, what was you were active in campus politics. There was a huge campus movement for Bernie Sanders in the primary. What were the politics? What were people talking about? What were the issues that mattered to people that you were talking to?
Most of the issues that mattered were education, because we've seen it here in Wisconsin. Education's been getting cut left and right since Governor Walker has taken over. And at UW Parkside, we're losing professors because professors, there's no point to stay here because of the education system. There's no investment. So that has been a big issue because, I mean, if there's no education system, and we are experiencing that in this election, we saw an overwhelming amount of voters who with high school educations or less, or some college education overwhelmingly vote for Donald Trump. So we saw an education gap. So we have to start investing in education and doing these things. And these were concerns that on campus, that there is no investment in education anymore.
You know, it's interesting, you know, in terms of how, John, how important a college degree is to where people's earning potential happens in this country right now. Do people think that that's okay? That basically the way the rules been, the system's been set up is that you have to have a 4-year college degree in order to make a decent living in America? People don't think that's okay. What do you think?
Well, let me just say, you know, first of all, I'm so happy that we're doing this here in this historic Local 72 hall. Kenosha really is a town that is like so many towns throughout the Midwest that had a strong manufacturing base, strong unions, and over the years that has eroded, whether it's Democratic administrations, Republican administrations. Over the last 30 years, we have lost a good thing that we had. The question of a college degree, you know, every generation should expect to do better than the one that preceded them. And that is not happening in this country anymore. And a lot of that is because of the loss of manufacturing jobs. We had generations that came into these plants, worked in these plants. Either their sons and daughters came to work in the plants, or they were able to provide a college education for their children so that they could move up. That has changed now. We don't have the type of strong unions. These were low-wage jobs when the unions organized them. Right. Low-wage jobs in this country with unions can become better wage and better benefit jobs.
So that brings us back around to the point that Jamie was making. Can you imagine, Senator, to Jamie's point, right? So the idea is that we've got all these service jobs. We don't have manufacturing jobs the way we do. Can you imagine these service jobs being able to provide a life like the UAW jobs?
Absolutely. In fact, you're seeing in Nevada, the Culinary Workers Union, who have, through their struggles, created a situation where the women making the beds in big hotels and cleaning the toilets are making middle-class wages and have good health care because they have a strong union. There's nothing holy about somebody being in a factory making more money than somebody making beds. It has to do, I think, as you've indicated, if you have a strong union, every human being has the same needs, whether you work in a factory or whether you work in a hotel. And our job is to grow the union movement, in my view, to raise the minimum wage so that if you work 40 hours a week, you don't live in poverty in America. Now, the main point that I want to make now is, and a lot of people don't know this, right now, this moment in the United States, we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We are not a poor country. We are the wealthiest country in the world. And yet so many people are hurting, in my view, because of what large multinational corporations are doing. They are giving huge bonuses and severance packages to their CEOs while they're shutting down in America and moving to Mexico. You get rewarded for shutting down plants in this country. You get rewarded for breaking unions. And our job is, legally and culturally, to change that system. There is no reason, and I want to... I mean, people can argue with me, and I'd like to hear it. I know not everybody agrees. But I think there is no reason why in this country we cannot do what other countries do. Anthony, you talked about education. There are countries around the world, many of them, where public colleges and universities are tuition free because they ask the wealthy to start paying their fair share of taxes.
All right. Senator Sanders here in Kenosha. Kenosha. And, sir, I wanted to talk to you for a second. Stand up for me. Tell me your name.
Daryl Modine.
Daryl, and what do you do here?
Well, I am the past National Vice President for the League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC, and have been quite involved in the Get Out to Vote effort across the country.
You know, folks talk about immigration in this country, and obviously it was a sort of front-of-mind issue. Gail talked about it a little bit just a few moments ago. And, you know, there's lots of places people do really palpably feel like what's happening in the economy is that they're having a harder time, and there's some set of folks that are coming in and are not having as hard a time or are able to get jobs, or those jobs are undercutting their wages. And you know, that was something very near the surface of this election. How determinative was that, do you think, here?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern, but I also think there was a lot of embellishment and a lot of confusion over what the facts really are here. You know, I heard the young lady, and I respect your views and opinions, talk about the undocumented here. Truth be told, only a third of the, 3% of the U.S. population is undocumented, and over half of those came here and overstayed their visas, right? And then a percentage of those are Hispanics. So I think there's always been a lot of finger pointing at who's to blame, and the facts necessarily haven't been being shared the way they should be.
Do you think it's scapegoating?
Yes, I do.
What do the folks in the panel think about immigration? How important was immigration for you guys up there?
I think legal immigration is not a problem. It's the illegal immigration we have a problem with. And they have ignored the laws for so many years, it's gotten out of hand. They got to get it back to the rule of law in this country. And I think that's what it is.
Let me ask a broader question, because I think this gets to how people might be feeling here at Kenosha. And Senator, you could jump in here, but I'm just curious, at a really broad level, how many people are optimistic about this country right now? Raise your hand. Yeah. How many people are pessimistic about this country right now? How do you folks up on the rostrum there, how do you feel about the first month of this new administration, how Donald Trump has been in this transition? Do you feel like it's given you more or less hope?
I think he's shaking things up a little bit, and I kind of like it. Yeah. Things need to be shook up a little bit. Both parties need to be shook up a little bit.
You're agreeing, Richard?
I'm optimistic.
You're optimistic?
I'm usually not optimistic, but this time I am.
What do you mean you're usually not optimistic?
Well, look at the past. Look at what we've had for the last few presidencies. It's just a lot of bogus rhetoric.
Did you feel that way about George W. Bush?
Yes.
You didn't like him?
No.
And you voted for Barack Obama?
Yes.
And you feel disappointed?
Yes.
And now you're hopeful about the future?
Yes.
Senator Sanders, are you hopeful or pessimistic about the future of this country?
Well, I'll tell you something. On a personal note, running around the country as a candidate for president, I became extremely optimistic because all over this country we had these very giant rallies, and we met with large groups, and we met with small groups, people like people who are here today. And the decency of the American people and the love of country of the American people and the desire to make this country a better place in which to live and raise families really blew me away. It really did. So in that sense, especially among the younger people, I am extremely optimistic about the future of this country. On the other hand, there is some rhetoric coming from Mr. Trump, which, needless to say, disturbs me very, very much. His campaign, which was based on bigotry, bothers me. This cabinet that he's appointing, it seems the major qualification is to have to be a billionaire. And I don't know that that is, you know, when you talk about taking on the establishment, you're not really talking about bringing Goldman Sachs into your administration. You're not talking about bringing the head of ExxonMobil into your administration. You know, you're not talking about, you know, attacking a guy named Chuck Jones, who was a head of the local steelworkers in Indianapolis. That's not taking on the establishment. That's bringing the establishment right into your administration. So in that sense, I worry very much.
Yeah, I think he's talking about the do-nothing Congress and the bureaucrats we have in Washington, D.C. that keep ignoring everybody. Not that kind of establishment. Those guys know how to get things done, and we got to give them a chance. If they don't, we'll get them out and put somebody else in 4 years, because we're all still going to be here. We're not going anywhere.
See, this is an interesting point, because ultimately, right, what I find most interesting about how this next 4 years develops is that, right? Which is ultimately is the proof in the pudding? Is it that life is better for folks in Kenosha and Wisconsin and across the greater industrial Midwest in the U.S.? Is that going to be the test, ultimately, of the political success of this person that we've just elected President of the United States? I want to thank our audience, our panels, our participants, and, of course, thank you to Senator Bernie Sanders. That does it for us here in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The Rachel Maddow Show starts next.